So, this week we're going to talk about establishing your thresholds, whether it's for threshold speed or heart rate or power. So, I'm going to go into some detail about how to view these and how to figure them out. So, the first thing you should know about setting up your threshold is that you need a fair amount of conditioning before you can really get an accurate number. So, if you're just getting into training, whatever sport it might be, give yourself a few weeks before you attempt to do a heart rate threshold test or any sort of testing, because your fitness needs to be at least moderately good before you get any sort of value that's going to make sense and be helpful in any way. The other thing to know is that as a newer athlete, if you try to do a test very early on in your training life, you have a higher chance of getting injured because it's a high intensity session. So don't do anything for several weeks. I'm going to say at least 2 months, if not 3 or 4 months, before you even try to set up a threshold. That being said, the best way to establish your threshold is to get tested at a lab. And that's where they can do blood testing, pricking your finger. They can hook you up to an oxygen mask and get very scientific and show you exactly where your graph changes, where your VT1, ventilatory threshold 1, and then ventilatory threshold 2, which is corresponding to lactate threshold. And so you see this chart very specifically and also tell you about your energy systems when you switch from burning mostly fat to mostly carbohydrate and things like that. So that's the best way. That's typically going to cost you $400, $500 at a reputable lab. It might be a little less at some other places. Not if your price is less than that, that's great. I'm saying it's going to be an average of $400 or $500. So if you want to avoid that expense, there are several ways you can do this as a road test or a street test, however you want to view that. So for swimming, obviously oxygen masks are difficult, and stopping and pricking your finger while you're swimming is not realistic. So in swimming, you could try to get a heart rate threshold or track your heart rate, but it's going to be difficult. So really in swimming, you're going to be looking at time. So you're going to establish your speed threshold. The way to do this, and it's a grind, but this is the real way to do it, is to do at least a 20-minute, if not a 30-minute, as hard as you can go nonstop in the pool. I got to backtrack for a second. When we're talking about thresholds, we're talking about our lactate threshold or blood lactate threshold. It could be your functional threshold, power threshold, but they all are based on what you can hold for about 1 hour. When you go longer than that, you're going to be under your threshold. If you go shorter than that, like 40 minutes, you can be higher than your actual threshold. But the threshold is what you could hold for about 1 hour. So most of these tests are based on the idea of doing a minimum of 20 minutes, if not a 30-minute time trial. So back to swimming. In swimming, you're going to figure out your pace. So if you're swimming yards and you swim 30 minutes and your average pace was 110 for those 30 minutes, then your threshold is going to be you're going to multiply that by about 97%. So that's going to be like a 113, 114 pace. The same goes for running. For running, one of the best ways to look at your pace is to research somebody called Jack Daniels, and he has what's called the VDOT method. So you can take your time or set up a test and figure out your 5K pace or your 10K pace, and this will tell you all your corresponding training paces. Because I know some of you out there, don't trust heart rate, you don't want to get the foot pod, things like that. So Jack Daniels VDOT is the best way to figure out your run train paces. The test for the run, ideally, you can do a 5K or a 10K in a real race situation. You take that number. If you did a 5K, you'd say your threshold is about, well, you would multiply that number by 96%. So if you ran, a 22-minute, and so that pace is 7:10, 90, that's a 96%. I'm talking backwards, right? Then your threshold pace is going to be like a 7:20 or a 7:25. If, and I could be off, I'm just going off numbers here. If you did a 10K and you ran the 10K at like 40 minutes, then that's very close to an hour threshold. So your pace on 40 minutes, I don't know what that is. That's 6:30. I'm going to say 6:30. So your threshold is only a little higher than that. We're talking like you're at like 97%. So that's going to be like a 6:35, 6:40, right? So you can do the math, but you see where I'm going, right? So if you ran a 6:30 for 40 minutes, you could run 6:40, 6:45 for an hour. Same for the 5K, because it's shorter, you add a little more time. If you ran 6:30 pace at a 5K, maybe your threshold is more like a 6:50 or a 6:55. Okay. Don't yell at me because my numbers are off a little bit. I'm trying to give you the idea behind all this. You could do the same thing with a power pod with running on your foot, right? So you can actually record wattage for running, and the calculation is going to be exactly the same. If it's a 20-minute test, you multiply that number by 0.96. If it's a 30-minute test, you multiply that by 0.97, right? So you're adjusting your threshold down from where your time was, so that, because we're talking about an hour is the threshold. For biking, because of the variability, hills, wind, etc., knowing your power threshold is very, very helpful, especially if you're anywhere in the moderately serious range for triathlon training. So a normal number for really good male athlete is going to be like 300 or 350 watts is their threshold. The test, again, ideally you could go out and do like a 30K or 40K time trial. So if you're riding 40K, you're going to be at somewhere between an hour and a half, depending on your speed. If you're over an hour, you're going to adjust your threshold up from what you got on that hour and a half, let's say. If you're under an hour, you're going to adjust the threshold, the number that you got, down from that 45 minutes, let's say. But back to the 30 or 20 minute, because these are the most common things. You go out, you do as close to a 30-minute time trial as you can, either on a flat road with no interruptions, because if you try to do this on a road with a bunch of turns, a bunch of stops, you're hitting your watch, it's going to invalidate the data, and you're better off not even wasting your time if you have to go through a trafficy area. Either do it on a flat open road with minimal to no stops, no turns, or do it on a trainer. Now on the trainer, it's very demanding because you're going to get hot, so you need at least one fan blowing on you. And I've discovered that a lot of people have trouble really tapping into that hard maximal effort for such a long duration indoors. You can do it. It's mentally tougher than being outside with the wind and cool air going across your body. So anyway, you do your 30-minute test. Let's say you did a 250. You're going to multiply 250 by 97%. That's 7.5 you're taking off. So you're at like 242 or 243. And that would be the number that you would use as your current functional threshold. Once you've gotten these paces or thresholds set up, it is really helpful to look at some training zones, right? So you have your aerobic training zones, zone 1 and 2. You have your kind of intermediate zone, which is like zone 3. Some people call it tempo. Some people call it no man's land. Some people call it a different name. But it's harder than moderate, but it's easier than hard, right? So it's moderate hard. It's in the middle. The important thing for triathletes is a lot of your half Ironman pace is going to be in that zone, right? So you need to know what is this kind of middle hardish zone. It's about 80 to 85% of your functional threshold power. And that's really where most people will wind up targeting for a half Ironman. So know that number, get good at being able to ride in that number. There is literature out there that says this is not the optimal zone to train in, and that is true. However, if that's the zone that you need to be good at racing in, then you need to be comfortable training and racing in that zone. So it's not the best thing to increase your threshold, but it is good to specificity of racing, right? Then the zone 4 is like that zone that's just under threshold. Zone 5 is now over threshold, right? And so the best bang for your buck is doing zone 4 and zone 5 training, but you can't do that all the time, right? That should be not really more than 20-ish% of your training volume. Everything else should be in the aerobic zone or specific training in the zone 3, no man's land tempo zone. Uh, Back to Jack Daniels VDOT. So I love that for run paces because one of the things with running is sometimes it's cooler out, your heart rate's going to be lower. When it's hotter, almost all of us are going to have a higher heart rate, right? And so if we just go off our heart rate, you'd be like, oh my gosh, I got to slow down because I'm way outside my zone. And that may be true, and you may discover that it does impact you because a higher heart rate is more demanding, it's more stress on your body. But if you're training to run a 5K at 20 minutes and that pace is 6:27, then you should be training your mile repeats at 6:27 or faster, regardless of what your heart rate is doing. So always keep that in mind. You don't have to be a slave to one method of approach when you're getting ready for something. You can go by pace, you can use your heart rate data or power data as knowledge that you apply, but you're not tied to one specific modality of training. So this has been about threshold testing and what to do with your thresholds. I hope you found that helpful. I realize I kind of talked in a circle a little bit, but there's lots of information out there. 30-minute test, hour threshold, set up your zones. There's something over here. I'll see you next time.